Hello, welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. This is live from Paris with me, Rochelle Harrison-Pless. The headlines. An 11th hour cancellation. North Korea scraps high-level talks with South Korea after joint US-South Korean military exercises, Pyongyang calling them a provocation. Furious scenes erupt at the UN Security Council at its emergency meeting on the deadly violence in Gaza. The Palestinian envoy slamming Israel for what it calls crimes against humanity. This as new scuffles in the enclave leave 2 Palestinian protesters dead. Plus, bringing the Iran nuclear deal back from the brink. The Iranian foreign minister meets with EU powers in Brussels to save the agreement after the recent US pullout. Both sides say they're on the right track to keeping the deal alive. First up, the path to peace is indeed a rocky one. North Korea has scrapped high-level talks with South Korea at the last minute after the US and South Korea launched joint military exercises. Pyongyang said the move was a provocation, but Washington is calling them routine. It comes just weeks after an historic inter-Korean summit where the longtime enemies promised to move towards lasting peace. Well, earlier I spoke to France 24's correspondent in Seoul, Bruce Harrison. He has more on those suspended talks.
Well, at this time, we have not had an official reaction from South Korea yet. It's still quite early here, and I'm sure they're preparing a statement in response. I'm sure the South Korean government will be disappointed that North Korea has canceled this meeting of high-level officials. To put this in some context, though, this is far from the first time we've seen North Korea at what seems to be the last minute or very unexpectedly pull out of an agreement, even as recently as this year. During the time of the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, South Korea, the two sides were supposed to hold a cultural performance at North Korea's Mount Gumgang, which is not too far north of the demilitarized zone, the border separating the two Koreas. And at that moment, it also canceled at the last minute, saying it was unhappy with media reports about certain aspects in the South. It also, in the past, has pulled out of similar deals, citing exactly this, U.S. ROK combined military drill. However, it's interesting, just earlier this year, as the détente was taking place, diplomacy improving between the countries, Kim Jong-un had suggested he was okay with earlier exercises this year between U.S. and South Korea, the Full Eagle exercises that also take place every year. However, now apparently North Korea upset about the Max Thunder Air Force exercises taking place between the U.S. and South Korea.
Bruce Harrison in Seoul. To other world news, a moment of silence for the 60 Palestinians who were killed by Israeli troops on the Gaza border on Monday. That's how the UN Security Council opened its emergency meeting on the violence, the deadliest day in the enclave since the Israeli-Gaza conflict in 2014. But the Council failed to reach consensus after a series of fiery exchanges. On one side, Kuwait is preparing a draft resolution to protect Palestinian civilians, while the United States is defending Israel and its, quote, use of restraint, which is being widely condemned around the world as an excessive use of force against Palestinian protesters. Let's hear from the French ambassador to the UN.
We would like to call on Israeli authorities to be discerning, to show restraint and not to use force disproportionately. Israel has a rule of law and needs to apply the rules of engagement that are in line with international standards when it comes to maintaining order, in line with its international obligations. We condemn the indiscriminate firing against protesters, which was something systematic. Nothing can justify this.
As the diplomatic fallout from Monday's bloodshed continues, scuffles in Gaza erupted once again. According to Palestinian health officials, 2 protesters were killed by Israeli gunfire. Meanwhile, the first funerals have been held for the Palestinian victims, among them children and infants. Catherine Viet has more.
She may be the youngest victim. Layla Al-Gondor's parents bid their 8-month-old daughter a tearful farewell. Her family says she died after inhaling tear gas.
We went to the border tent camp, where Israeli soldiers fired tear gas. And when we were leaving, we saw the baby struggling to breathe, and she moved her head, but then she had choked.
Hers is not the only funeral being held in Gaza. Family and friends gathered to say goodbye to this 23-year-old young man. He was shot and killed by Israeli soldiers. At least 60 people have died and over 2,200 have been injured in one of the deadliest days of violence since the 2014 war. Many of those protesting are being treated for gunshot wounds.
A bunch of protesters and I were at the border in a peaceful march. We were surprised that military jeeps fired gas and live bullets.
The huge numbers of injured Palestinians have overwhelmed Gaza's already stressed hospitals.
We have no more beds to receive more wounded. The hospital is full. There are still huge numbers of wounded waiting for urgent surgical intervention.
The high death toll has shocked the international community, and Israel is facing a growing backlash over allegations of excessive force. Israel has blamed Hamas, accusing the organization of trying to carry out attacks against Israeli civilians under the cover of the protests.
North of Israel, Lebanon is home to a large population of Palestinian refugees. On Tuesday, many gathered at Beaufort Castle to commemorate Nakba, otherwise known as the catastrophe, the anniversary of the founding of Israel, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes. Well, the castle overlooks the Golan Heights and sits on land that was occupied by the Israeli army for 18 years. Our Beirut correspondent Layla Malana Allen sent us this.
According to the United Nations, there are up to 450,000 Palestinian refugees living here in Lebanon. Many of them are very young, third, fourth, even fifth generation refugees from people who came in 1948 and 1967. And at this Nakba Day commemoration today, passions are running high for the Great March of Return, as it's called. One of those people is Ahmad Jamaa. He's 35 and a third generation refugee whose grandfather came in 1948 and whose father was born on the border. He understands that passion to return to Palestine, but also the danger of going too close to the border, as many people here are concerned about what's been seen on the Gazan border in the last few days.
We are here today coming to say that we still believing to go home, to our homeland, Palestine, and we still have this right, and we still have this passion. I still believing that I will come one day with my family, with everything that I have it here in Lebanon, to my homeland, to my village. And we know that these young people, they have this passion and this power to go homeland. But we don't want to be killed and die like this with nothing. We want to be have this message today that we still have this right and we want to go home one day.
Palestinian refugees from Lebanon were invited to this event today, but many haven't been able to come because the checkpoints across the country are being tightly enforced, thanks to fears that if people approach the Israeli border, if even one Palestinian were shot, it could start a war. And here at this event, people are running up to the hill that overlooks Israel. We just had a storm of young people coming. Many fears that violence could be ignited as a result.
France 24's correspondent Layla Malana Allen there. Next, scrambling to save the Iran nuclear deal, EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini is optimistic following talks between European powers and the Iranian Foreign Minister in Brussels. Mohammad Javad Zarif met with diplomats from Britain, France and Germany in a bid to revive the historic accord after the US recently walked away. Mogherini said it was up to the E3 to keep the deal afloat, while Zarif said Iran needs guarantees the Europeans will uphold their side of the bargain. According to Zarif, the clock is ticking.
We are starting a process that needs to be very intensive, and we don't have a lot of time. We need to reach some sort of guarantee that these benefits can be guaranteed for Iran within that specified period of time that the President said, a few weeks. We are going to see whether the political will that has been expressed by the remaining participants in JCPOA can be translated into specific actions.
I spoke to our Tehran correspondent Reza Sayeh for more on expectations in Iran as efforts are made to save the deal.
They expect guarantees. They expect to continue to benefit from what's left of the Iran nuclear deal and seemingly some positive developments tonight. Iran and the E3 saying that they're committed to this deal. And remember, these developments happened relatively quickly. It was 1 week ago today when U.S. President Donald Trump violated the Iran nuclear deal by reimposing sanctions. Soon after, Iran made its position clear. They say they're going to commit to the nuclear deal. They're going to try to save it. However, they made it clear that they need guarantees. They need guarantees from the remaining 5 signatories of the deal that they're going to get the benefits that they expected when they signed this deal in 2015. Getting those guarantees from Russia, China, seemingly easy. They have good relations with Iran. From the Europeans, getting those guarantees a bit tougher. However, France, Germany, the UK, the E3 came out tonight and clearly stated that they have the same objective as Iran, that they're going to draft and devise a line of action, a plan to deliver to Iran the benefits that it expects, and at the same time keep Iran from delivering on its promise, and that's to continue to restrict its nuclear program. Some analysts say it's going to be difficult. Others say it's going to be impossible because, remember, when Mr. Trump pulled the U.S. out of the deal, he warned all global companies, European companies, that you have 3 to 6 months to wind down businesses with Iran. Otherwise, you're going to face hefty fines. And that's the challenge moving forward for Europe, how to deliver these guarantees to Iran and avoid the sanctions and undermining their very important relations with the U.S. banking system.
How hopeful are the Iranian people when it comes to those guarantees? You mentioned they were dealt a blow by the U.S., but do they think the Europeans can really salvage this deal?
Iranians have been through a lot. Even so, they're resilient. They're always hopeful. However, when you talk to people, the hope is fading fast. Many understand that the U.S. pullout last week of this deal possibly gave this deal a death blow. They understand that the global financial system runs on the U.S. dollar. Oftentimes, the U.S. has the final say. So even though there were some positive developments today, very positive, determined tenor from the meeting today, not too many people hopeful. They say they'll see it when they believe it. And as Mr. Zarif, Iran's foreign minister, says, time is running out. Important few weeks ahead.
Al-Reza Sayah in Tehran for us. Catalonia's new leader, Quim Torra, has got down to business barely 24 hours after getting the green light from the Catalan parliament. The hardline separatist held a joint news conference in Berlin alongside former regional leader Carles Puigdemont, who's in self-imposed exile. Torra wants an end to Madrid's direct rule over Catalonia and also wants to put Puigdemont back in power, describing himself as simply a caretaker president. Now, 2 years behind bars and a fine of €300,000. That's the punishment for France's disgraced former budget minister Jérôme Cahuzac. On Tuesday, a French appeals court upheld his conviction for tax fraud and money laundering, but reduced his initial jail sentence of 3 years. While Cahuzac's job was to crack down on tax cheats, he himself was hiding hundreds of thousands of euros in overseas bank accounts.
In 2012, Jérôme Cahuzac stood before Parliament and said he had no offshore accounts.
I do not have, nor did I ever have, foreign bank accounts, not before and not now.
The former budget minister was denying revelations published by French media, revelations that he did have offshore accounts in Switzerland and Singapore. The reports contradicted the image Cahuzac had projected to the public as the Hollande administration's self-proclaimed crusader against tax fraud and evasion. French media reported that he had some €3 million in offshore accounts. The money came from a medical practice he ran with his now ex-wife Patricia, who was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Under mounting pressure, Cahuzac resigned in 2013 and ultimately admitted to the offshore accounts. His trial began in 2016 after being charged with money laundering and tax fraud. Financial prosecutor Eliane Houlet said of Cahuzac, "You have tarnished this country's honor. What has not been repaired and will never be is the harm done to our country." which became a laughingstock. He was initially sentenced to 3 years in prison, a sentence he appealed. 2 years later, in 2018, he lost on appeal. He was handed a 4-year jail term, including a 2-year suspended sentence. However, Khauzek will likely not go behind bars, as jail terms of 2 years or less are often reduced to probation under French law.